So what this objectification boils down to, the purpose it serves for us mentally, is all about power. So basically, human society depends a lot upon hierarchies. So you get things like, I think one analogy that comes to my mind, one thing that sort of the way I think about it, is sort of like family, right? Like a really dysfunctional, violent family. You get a dynamic that might go a bit like this. The father beats the mother beats the child, and the child kicks the dog, right? And basically, everyone within that dynamic is dependent upon there being someone else below them upon whom they can have power over, and they can inflict violence upon. And the reason why this prejudice against animals is so deeply entrenched is because animals are the bottom of the lowest rung of the hierarchy ladder, so to speak. Everyone is viewed as more important than an animal, no matter how disabled you are, or how badly black people are viewed in your community, or women, or children. And children and severely disabled people are only just above animals, and you will notice this a lot. You may have noticed when you were a child experiencing a lot of frustration because you would tell people things. You know, maybe you hurt yourself, or you were injured or something, and it wasn't in a way that other people could see. You might have been ignored, and people would just sort of shake it off and sort of laugh at you. Because the thing is that a lot of the time, children almost end up in that same box with animals as not being quite human. In our society, because of the negative power dynamics, everyone always seems to be seeking out someone that they are more powerful than, to feel like they have a more, like a higher position on that ladder. And people don't, and to opt out of that system is viewed as being extremely abnormal. So you get things like, this is more prevalent, you see this a lot with men, because men are seen as being on the higher rung. So if a man rejects his male privilege, to pursue negative things, he will be perhaps severely judged by his peers. So you might see this, you might get a guy who's invited to a bucks night at a strip club and says, no, I don't want to go. And his friends will be confused by this, and he'll say, no, I find that offensive. Maybe he might say, I find that degrading to women, and he'll get ridiculed. Because why on earth would you want to not embrace that higher level of power over that you've been given? And also another indication of how low on the rung animals are, where they figure into this hierarchy, is if you've seen the film The Elephant Man, John Merrick, when he's being chased by the crowd, he screams out, I am not an animal. Or when someone is being severely mistreated, people will say, oh, she was treated like an animal. And we understand what that means. To be treated like an animal is to be treated in the most debased fashion that one could ever be treated in. So you also hear that a lot with people who, make stupid comments like, I didn't evolve to be the top of the food chain to eat vegetables. Which basically says, I somehow, through being born a human, have earned this power and this right to inflict suffering and death upon others. which doesn't appear to be grounded in fact. And people have often taken objectification of people to the point of animalizing them. In a lot of cases in history, basically, one that comes to mind from Australian history is that at one point, about 100 or so years ago, there were a bunch of people, white men, who were engaged in an argument about whether or not indigenous people were actually human, or whether they were a divergent species, therefore not human, but animal, which would excuse them, it excuses anything happening to them. You can do anything you want to an animal, and this is, obviously, prior to any animal welfare legislation, most of which is completely useless anyway. Yes. So, and also it comes out in other ways, like people will even be like hateful and sadistic in discussing the way animals are treated. So you'll get like on YouTube, I've seen it a few times, people finding it humorous to watch videos of animals being slaughtered or mistreated, or glorifying it in some way. You have a lot of videos put up about animal slaughter or mistreatment that aren't put up by animal rights activists, but are actually put up by people who think that this is somehow noble, and like a noble way to behave, the right way to behave. Yeah. So, that's how far it can go, and that is very similar to the ways in which a lot of different classes of people have been treated as well. People taking, great glee in, mistreating those who were enslaved, things like that, making it entertainment. And, and just as we would say today, it's just an animal. People would say back then, but it's just a black person, Just as, in the past, similar things were said about women. Over 100 years ago, there were another bunch of white men who were engaged in a debate about whether or not women had souls. Now, you've got to think of this from a Christian standpoint. I'm not putting down Christians by saying this. I'm just saying it's like a Christian Western worldview. The difference between animals and humans from that perspective is that humans have an immortal soul and animals don't. So if you're saying that we're not sure whether women have souls or not, you're actually saying that perhaps women aren't human, or a lower form of humanity. And that's where you get all kinds of things, like there used to be, if anyone's heard of the term rule of thumb, it was law in Australia up until the 70s that you were allowed to beat your wife with a stick no wider than your thumb. So that's what objectification is all about. And like all the prejudices that spring from it or use it as justification, it's always been found to be completely baseless. So, obviously today, I'm assuming, no one would seriously argue that an Aboriginal person was not human, right? They were wrong. People used to seriously argue that women were a lower form of humanity. They were wrong. You know?